It's a story that echoes far beyond the immediate tragedy, sending ripples of shock and despair through entire nations. The story of Lindsay Hawker, a young English teacher whose life was brutally cut short in Japan. A calculated crime that united two nations in mourning. At the heart of this tragedy was a suspect, soaring to the top of Japan's most wanted list, willing to deform his own face to keep his identity hidden from the world. We begin in England, in the city of Coventry. Known for its medieval cathedral and its resilience after devastating World War II bombing, Coventry is a thriving hub. This is where Lindsay Hawker, a vibrant and ambitious young woman, called home. She was born on December 30th, 1984. A happy child, growing up with her two sisters and excelling in school. She attended King Henry VIII School, then ventured to the University of Leeds to study biology. She was serious about her future career while also popular among her friends. Lindsay was bright, nurturing, caring, and successful, but she also had an appetite to try something new. Before diving into her master's degree, Lindsay decided to embark on a year-long adventure. In mid-2006, Lindsay hatched a plan, a year abroad, working and traveling, to gain a new perspective on life. In October 2006, she signed up with Nova, Japan's largest private English school, renowned for recruiting adults from around the world to teach the language. And just like that, the ambitious young girl was on a flight across the globe to Japan. Landing in Tokyo, Lindsay was assigned to Kaiwa, a district in the Edogawa ward, finding comfort and excitement in her new surroundings. Close to Akihabara and Asakasa, the area offered a plethora of activities and fun. Whether she was in the mood for food, parks, shopping, temples, or just a good drink, Tokyo had it all. She found herself in one of the most interesting cities that the world had to offer. And she was loving it. So in November she moved further east to a place called Chiba, and this is where our story goes from sweet to vile. About 6 months into her stay, in March 2007, Lindsay had an awkward encounter. She had finished work for the day and traveled back to Chiba Station. Before unlocking her bike, a man approached her from behind. She turned around. The man greeted her by saying, "You are my English teacher." Lindsay was confused. She was sure that he was not one of her students. She awkwardly declined to comment, but the man continued following her. She jumped on her bike and began to cycle away, but the man followed her. He sped up, his walking turning into jogging, then running. With Chiba's many roads, it was nearly impossible for Lindsay to escape. The man continued to strike up a conversation, asking Lindsay where she was from. She still tried to shake him off, though she eventually reached her apartment, and that's where she stopped her bike. The man was known as Tatsuya Ichihashi, and he had been running after Lindsay for the entire duration. Back home, when he finally caught up with her, he had a proposal to make. Despite his strange performance, the offer was simple. Ichihashi asked Lindsay if she'd be interested in providing him with English lessons. He felt like he needed a little bit of help with the language. They could meet in a cafe, and he'd pay her generously by the hour. Lindsay politely refused. Her work schedule was busy enough, and the time she did have off was on her own terms, having fun. Ichihashi was disappointed, but he did seem to accept her answer. It was here, though, that he asked her one final, strange question. He was thirsty, after pretty much chasing Lindsay throughout the streets of Chiba, and he asked her if she'd politely provide him a glass of water in her apartment. Lindsay was hesitant but reluctantly allowed him into the apartment. Sure, he was a strange man, and he did make her feel uncomfortable, but she had 2 roommates. This was a good opportunity to indirectly show the man that she did have company at all times, and it was an opportunity for her friends to see his face should it ever come up again in the future. They entered the apartment together, and it was inside the apartment, while having his drink, that he made the offer again. It came with a price tag. This time, he'd pay Lindsay 3,500 yen, or $32 an hour, and the interaction would be strictly business. This was an offer Lindsay couldn't refuse. Although Nova was helping her get by in Tokyo, she could do with some extra cash, and this was easy money. She agreed to his request, deciding to meet him at a coffee shop a few days later. Ichihashi was appreciative, and he thanked Lindsay for the offer before he'd leave her apartment. Though, he wanted to give her one last thing. He whipped out a pen from his back pocket, grabbed some scrap paper, and he started scribbling. A few moments later, he handed her the note. It was a sketch he had just drawn, one of Lindsay, and along the sketch was his name and his phone number. Tatsuya Ichihashi was a 28-year-old man from the city of Ichikawa, also located in Chiba Prefecture. He was born in Gifu Prefecture on January 5, 1979, and initially grew up there before moving to Chiba. He was born into a successful family. His father was a medical doctor at a local hospital in Chiba, while his mother was also a professional dentist. In his younger years, Tatsuya had ambitions to follow his father's footsteps in becoming a medical doctor, but when he failed his exams and was denied in advancing his studies, he settled for a degree from the Department of Horticulture. He graduated from Chiba University in 2005, and although he passed his degree relatively well, Tatsuya did not make the effort to find any work. Instead, he lived on an allowance of 100,000 yen, or $920 a month, from his parents. And this is where we learn a little more about the dark half of Tatsuya Ichihashi. Tatsuya had no previous convictions with the law, but he had been the subject of an allegation of prior theft and injury. Allegedly, he had assaulted a woman on the street during a robbery, but the matter had been settled out of court. It is alleged that his father paid the woman off with around 1 million yen, or $10,000. He was also described as a loner with an obsession for physical fitness. Tatsuya regularly attended his local gym, and he often cycled over 25 kilometers every day. In addition to this, Tatsuya was known to be a little reclusive, rebellious, and had no intention to find any work. And with only $900 a month to get by, were weekly sessions at $35 an hour really that sustainable? Back to Lindsay's apartment, though, after handing her the sketch with his name and his number, Tatsuya thanked Lindsay for her time and the glass of water. He wished her well until that meet a few days later. Fast forward several days, and it's now Saturday, March 24, 2007. Lindsay had contacted Tatsuya a couple days prior, and they'd arranged for their first English lesson in a local coffee shop. CCTV captured the two conversing while in the queue to grab a drink. Lindsay seemed relatively relaxed, but she did make clear steps backward whenever Tatsuya moved too close. The pair sat and spoke for what is assumed to be a little over an hour, and progress was good. At the end of it, though, Tatsuya awkwardly pointed out that he'd forgotten his money. "No worries," he said, "I only live half a mile down the road. Why don't you come by and grab your money, and then be on your way?" Lindsay agreed. And so the two hopped into a taxi. Lindsay hadn't brought her bike with her that day, and she also had work later on in the afternoon. So, when she arrived at Tatsuya's, she asked the taxi driver if he'd be so kind to wait for her. He agreed, and so Lindsay followed Tatsuya into his apartment. Several minutes later, though, Lindsay still hadn't returned. That's a little strange, the taxi driver thought, but maybe she's had a change of plans, no worries. And so, on that note, he left, completely forgetting about the incident. Lindsay failed to show up to work late that afternoon, however, and even worse, she never made it back to her apartment, either. Her housemates, already noting that she wasn't at work that day, started to worry about Lindsay. They called the police later that night to report her missing, but Saturday turned into Sunday, and Sunday turned into Monday. The family and friends of Lindsay back home in the United Kingdom were already starting to grow worried over her radio silence. It was only after Monday, though, when she missed a second day of work that panic really started to set in. The school contacted her parents to let them know that she had now missed 2 days in a row, and straight after that, they contacted the police. It was only then, though, that the police started taking Lindsay's disappearance a little more seriously. Police search efforts started at Lindsay's home, and the housemates were the first to be interviewed. And, with luck, they already had a suspect in mind. They knew that Lindsay went to see a man in a coffee shop shortly before she disappeared, and she'd also left his sketch back in the apartment. This was their first clue. It was around 5:40 p.m. that 2 officers were dispatched to Tatsuya's home, but after knocking on his door, no one answered it. His neighbors, though, were at home, and kindly they let officers peer over from the balcony and into Tatsuya's living room. There were no lights on in the property, but there did appear to be somebody lurking around inside, and, weirdly enough, his detachable bathtub had been moved from the bathroom to the balcony. On a hunch, the two officers called for backup. They were worried that maybe Lindsay was inside, being held hostage. Within the hour, 7 more officers arrived. 3 hours and 9 officers later, and police were getting ready to raid Tatsuya's home. It was then, in a surprise moment, that Tatsuya opened his front door with a rucksack in their feet. In that split moment of panic, Tatsuya stormed past police. They tried to grab him but only managed to get his rucksack. Tatsuya himself slipped by. They didn't manage to keep up with Tatsuya, either. With the building's hallways being so narrow and confusing, he managed to get by, and with police officers lacking any radio equipment, they lost all sight of the man. So, in the middle of Tokyo City, Tatsuya vanished into the night. It was as if the man had literally disappeared into thin air. But his property, just moments later, would reveal unspeakable truth. Police officers investigating his property would be in for a gruesome scene. There, they had found the naked body of Lindsay Hawker. She was found buried in Tatsuya's detachable bathtub, which he had moved himself to the balcony. The tub had been filled with a mixture of sand and soil, almost entirely covering Lindsay, with only her right hand emerging from the surface. She had been bound and gagged with plastic ties and scarves, and bruises were present across her upper body. In her final hour, she had been subjected to an extended assault. Her possessions still scattered across the room, along with the body sand and soil in the balcony bathtub. It also contained a decomposing agent to speed up the process of decomposition, and flower seeds were placed on top to disguise the bathtub as a flower bed. The seeds eventually would be feeding off Lindsay's body. To add to the harrowing discovery, it was also strangely noted that Tatsuya had shaved all of Lindsay's hair off of her head. Police would also discover several wigs in Tatsuya's apartment, alleging that Police would also discover several wigs in Tatsuya's apartment, alleging that perhaps he was a crossdresser. This quickly became public knowledge. And soon, after rumors even started circulating to suggest that maybe Tatsuya had killed Lindsay to wear her hair as a wig. By the next morning, Tatsuya Ichihashi was officially a wanted man across all of Japan. Police distributed wanted posters across the city, and his face was shown across multiple news sites. Interviews given to anyone who may have potential information, and raids were witnessed at locations of possible sightings of the suspect. But despite all efforts, just like a ghost, Tatsuya was nowhere to be seen. Hardly any sightings of the man were reported over the following weeks. In fact, all of them turned into dead ends. Police were so keen to capture the suspect, though, that they decided to release photoshopped images of Tatsuya wearing wigs, just in case he was out in drag. But Tatsuya was good at remaining unnoticed. In fact, he was so good at evading the police that his disappearance turned from weeks into months into years. And this frustrated Lindsay's family because, in addition to the relentless pain that they had to experience from the loss of their daughter, was the feeling that her killer got away. It was not just that, but they also felt that Japanese police were growing lazy and sloppy in their investigations. It angered Lindsay's parents so much, actually, that, just months after her death, the two would travel to Japan and single-handedly assist in raising awareness of Lindsay's killer. Her father, Bill, even met members of the Japanese mafia, the Yakuza, in a bar, giving them 2 bottles of whiskey as a present before asking them for their help. As time went on, Japanese police soon found themselves in the center of the spotlight. How did 9 police officers let one man slip by? Why did they take a month to quiz vital witnesses? And did they know that their wanted poster had a picture 7 years out of date? Police and the Hawker family would slowly start to argue against each other. And soon, British and Japanese media were involved, too. And while all of this was happening, Tatsuya was still out there. He had actually traveled across most of Japan during his time on the run, ranging from Amori, one of the most northern cities on Japan's main island, right down to the southern island of Okinawa. Tatsuya had remained unnoticed. He even lived on a remote island in a concrete bunker at times to avoid detection. 2. A year after Lindsay's death, in 2008, and right through 2009, Tatsuya found himself in Osaka, located 250 miles west of Tokyo. Osaka is a large port city and a commercial center to Honshu. It's known for its modern architecture, nightlife, and hearty street food. It was during this time that Tatsuya routinely lived in internet cafes and worked on construction sites to get by. With the money that he could save up, he would put that towards plastic surgery to change his appearance and avoid being caught by the law. However, he had actually already changed his appearance through self-mutilation. Ever since becoming wanted by the law, he'd cut off his moles, used scissors to cut off part of his lower lip, and eventually sewed a thread through his nose to alter its shape. By the summer of 2009, police were painfully desperate to find Tatsuya. It was here that the National Police Agency raised the cash reward for information, leading to the arrest of him from 1 million to 10 million yen. They also released a new statement advising it was believed that Tatsuya had plastic surgery performed to his face to alter his appearance and that people should be on the lookout for resemblances of Tatsuya's special identifications. And it worked. Because, in October 2009, a plastic surgeon located in Nagoya informed police that he believed that he had just worked on Tatsuya. Tatsuya had foolishly accepted to take a before and after picture of his operation. The same photos would be shared with police and eventually the world. This rattled Tatsuya. He knew that the newly released photos by police had blown his cover. In fact, it was so successful that one of his colleagues back at a construction site in Osaka recognized him. Tatsuya knew that he had to get out of Osaka and hide fast. His plan was, as he had done before in several other close calls, flee Okinawa and take refuge in one of the abandoned concrete bunkers found across its many remote islands. On November 10, 2009, he discreetly fled to Osaka's ferry port. 3 days of keeping his head low on a slow ferry Takanawa, and he would finally be in a much safer position away from justice. But before he could even reach the boat, Tatsuya's luck would finally run out. A worker at the very port had actually recognized his face and informed security that this could very well be the Ichihashi. And they were right, because only moments later, Tatsuya came face to face with a handful of officers. They asked him for his name, and at this stage, he knew it was over. He told them, "Yes, I am Tatsuya Ichihashi." The game was over. He was then formally arrested by police and was initially charged with abandoning a body. He would later be served 2 more warrants for rape and murder. And it would take 8 months for him to finally meet his jury on July 4, 2011. His trial began, and with the outcome pretty certain from the very beginning, deliberation wouldn't last long. A lot of attention was focused on how Japan's court system would punish Tatsuya. Although Japan does enforce the death penalty, not a lot of single-person murderers find it to be their fate. But Tatsuya was a well-publicized man in the media, and many voices supported the idea. During his trial, Tatsu admitted that he enticed Lindsay into his apartment, raped her, and then strangled her because he feared neighbors would hear her scream and call the police. On July 21, 2011, Tatsuya Ichihashi was officially sentenced to life imprisonment for the murder of Lindsay Hawker. And although Lindsay's family had asked for the death penalty for Tatsuya, the court felt that the death penalty was not appropriate, as he had no previous convictions and, at the age of 32, there was still a chance that he could one day become rehabilitated. The trial would not come without its fair share of new devastation and pain to Lindsay's family, however. Not only would they have to relive her final moments again, but they would also have to see new images of Lindsay's body, something they regret ever seeing. Following Tatsuya's sentence, Lindsay's parents shared the following to state media: "We've waited a long time for today, we've waited 4.5 years for justice. Lindsay loved Japan, and you have not let her down. Ichihashi, you have taken away a precious life, destroyed a whole existence, and stolen countless memories from us." The verdict, which puts Tatsuya behind bars for life, was welcomed by most people in the nation, and Tatsuya himself accepting his own fate. Shortly before trial, Tatsuya had actually authored and published a book confessing to Lindsay's murder, most of his biography describing how he'd spent 2.5 years on the run, and what he had to do to avoid detection. The book, which was named Until I Was Arrested, was offered with all royalties and profits to Lindsay's family, and over 100,000 copies would sell worldwide. But Lindsay's family rejected the offer, and despite Tatsuya's strange attempt as a good deed, nothing could bring them back their daughter. Lindsay was well loved. Successful, cheerful, and irreplaceable, she was in the middle of an incredible experience abroad, doing good by teaching others a valuable new skill, and in the end, it was a kindness that was used against her. By a strange, heartless man, she will be daily missed by her parents, her sisters, and all of her friends. If you enjoyed this story, please like and subscribe.